happy almost New Year to you all. It's a joy to be here with you. We've had a nice run of holidays, starting from the Christmas meditation to the Christmas day to today to New Year's Day. It's nice when in the cycle of the years when these events like Christmas and New Year's happen on Tuesday, Wednesday, so that we have the Sundays, and we end up having all these nice events in a row. Sometimes Christmas happens on Sunday, New Year's happens on Sunday, and we just have one big wallop together that way. So the end of the year is an interesting time because we reflect on what has happened in this year and we get excited for the new year. And very often, in fact, this year on Tuesday we will have a evening New Year's Eve celebration here at 10:30 p.m. and it goes through midnight, and it will include a purification ceremony, which is something we haven't yet done here in Chennai. It's a ceremony Swamiji created that we'll be introducing that evening. We'll also do a fire ceremony, as we do every Sunday, and we'll also have a meditation, a discourse, and so on. And we'll be meditating through midnight, so that the first thing we're doing when the clock strikes midnight of the new year is we'll be in meditation. So it's a nice way, an auspicious way to begin the new year. And often when doing the fire ceremony, sometimes you see people with a lot of enthusiasm just trying to throw 2013 into that fire and say, Vain Dam, I am done with you. And then, 2014, please come. What special high hopes we have in store. And we should. That's absolutely the right idea. But we have to scratch our heads a little bit, because even had we done this, we might have said, 2012, yes, 2013, please come. Last year. You see, it's kind of funny. Often we meet the end of the new year with a release, and the new year, the next coming year, with high hopes. Again, as we should. But we have to reflect that that often happens every year. Why? Partly because I think we need new opportunities. We need to feel, no matter what has happened in the past, let it be, I am starting anew now. And that's the idea behind reincarnation also. Because some people complain about or attack the theory of reincarnation. If I knew before, if I lived before, don't you think I would know it? I would remember all these things and so on. And Yogananda said, I think it's a good thing you don't remember all those things. Don't you think so? He gave one practical example. He said, suppose you died of cancer in the last life, and in this life then, you had a little boil somewhere on your body. He said you would be so afraid that it was the cancer coming back. But you don't remember the cancer. And we need a fresh start. Suppose we made a really big mistake that we regretted in the last life. Why not start over again without that burden, that worry, and so on? And similarly, of course, we've done lots of good things in the past too, but it's the bad things that sometimes can preoccupy us. And there's actually a caution in that. There was a disciple of Yogananda's who was dying, and Swami Kriyananda was with him, and Yogananda was alive at this time. And the man said, he was in the hospital on his deathbed, and the man said, I have done so many wrong things in my life. And when Swamiji reported this to Master, by the way, when I say Swamiji, I refer to Swami Kriyananda and Master Paramahansa Yogananda. Swamiji reported this to Master, and Master said, oh, he shouldn't have said that. Because the consciousness with which we leave the body is the consciousness that we start afresh in the next body. Master said, think of reincarnation, think of sleep. He said, when you go to sleep, you don't suddenly wake up an angel. He said, you were just the same as what you were before. And so that's interesting then, because in a way, every day we wake up, we can think of it as a new incarnation. And we should clear the past. We should not linger on past thoughts. Master said that his favorite passage in his own autobiography was the quote from Swami Sri Yukteswar, his guru. "The vanished lives of all men are dark with many shames. Everything in future will improve if you are making a spiritual effort now. Everything in future will improve, and everybody has some dark histories." And it's true. In fact, Master said, anything that you know not to do, for example, like a mistake, when you see someone making a mistake, like you see someone stealing a motorcycle, and hopefully if you saw, you would say, stop, and all that. But suppose you hear of somebody has stolen a motorcycle, and you think, shouldn't do that. And do you want to steal a motorcycle too? Seems to be a profitable business. No, thanks, no, I don't want to. I'm not attracted to that. Why? Master said it's because you've done it before. And you figured out that it didn't work. He said any wrong action that doesn't interest you, that doesn't attract you, and by you I mean us, all of us, is because we've done it before. And we said, you steal it, yes, and you make a little cash, but then the police come and you have to give all the cash back, plus you have to go to jail. It's not worth it. I know it's not worth it. And similarly with subtler things like telling lies or all these different mistakes that we can fall into. We've done it before. And we said, you know what? It doesn't work. I say this because it helps us from judging others. If we see someone else making that mistake, we can say, well, I remember when I did that, and I didn't like it, and I hope you find out too for yourself. Rather than saying like this, the finger of judgment is better pointed in this direction than outwardly. Because in ourselves we can work on. Ourselves we can improve. And if we see someone making a mistake, we can pray for that person. We can bless them. And or ask God to bless them. And we can also say, let me take note. Let me see. That person is obviously walking into with a blind spot into a trap. What are my blind spots? And it's hard to see your own blind spots because they're blind spots. But what little hints can I get about the things that I need to improve in myself and so on? And yet, at the same time, it's important to remember that freedom lies not in correcting every defect in our personality. Because if it did, it would just take forever. Swamiji likened it to trying to smooth out a carpet or the blanket, like the blanket on this floor. If there's one little wrinkle, you stretch it out straight, but then the wrinkle appears over there. So then you go over there, but then this side gets pulled, and it's just a never-ending task. And so our goal in this life is to overcome the ego. And it's not a small thing, but it's also the only thing that we need to do, overcoming this ego, this sense of I-ness. Now what does that mean, overcome the ego? Yogananda gave the illustration in this poem, Removing the Cork of Ignorance, that our soul, our divine essence, is the same as God. And again, according to Sanatana Dharma, this is pretty obvious, but still, it's worth repeating. That you can think of God as the ocean and made up of ocean water, and that we are also, our soul is also a little, maybe a pint of seawater also. But it is enclosed in a glass bottle. And so it's floating in the sea, and therefore separate from it for this time. And there's a cork in the bottle, of course. And so it's a little more complicated than that. It's not just one bottle, but it's 3 bottles, a bottle inside a bottle inside a bottle. And so if you think of this strange little, I wonder how we got ourselves into this mess of being inside these 3 little bottles. Think of them as glass bottles. At the time of death, the outermost bottle is the physical body. Sorry, in general, the outermost bottle is the physical body. At the time of death, that bottle is shattered. And we leave that bottle, leave that body. But still, there are 2 left. And this middle bottle is the astral body. And the astral body is made of energy. And so when you see in the movies that someone dies and then they sort of stand up and get outside of their body and they look just like themselves, except they're sort of shimmery and light, and this other body is just lying there still. That's the representation of the astral body. And the astral body does look like the physical body, Yogananda said. In fact, he said the physical body is a reflection of the astral body. Which the first time I heard that, I thought, oh, no, you mean the astral body is a reflection of the physical body, because, I mean, this is really who I am. You start to realize that, wait a minute, no, we have to invert our thinking. Energy comes before form, obviously. And we were in the astral body before the physical body and so on. And so, often people in the astral world, in their astral bodies, take on the appearance of how they looked when they were young. That's sort of most souls identify themselves that way. Sri Yukteswar was one exception. He walked around in his older form in the astral world. But even Yogananda's disciple had a vision of him after he left his body. And he said that he saw him joining all the other masters, and he looked all very young, just as he does in this picture here, a little older than in that picture when he was 16 at his guru's ashram. So, even beyond the causal body, the innermost body, the astral body, the innermost body is the causal body. This is the idea body, the thought form, the little thoughts that we identify ourselves with and clothe ourselves with. I could talk about how to overcome causal karma, but that's not really our problem right now. We would do well enough just to overcome the ego. That's enough freedom for now. And so the reason I say that it's enough is because from that state we cannot fall. That is our graduation. That's why we look up to the saints of all religions. That's why we look up to the avatars, because they have attained that state. It's sort of like the underclassmen looking up at the graduates. That's exactly what we're doing. He's saying they made it. How did they do it? Maybe they can give us a few tips. That's the whole point. And I say that for two reasons. One is we need to learn from their example, and the other is we need to remember that what they have achieved is our own destiny. Not because we're special, it's everyone's destiny. Every little 3-bottle contraption with the seawater in it eventually has to merge back into God. Why? Because it came out from God. And because, as we know, this is a dualistic reality, apparently, if it has gone out, it must then also return. So everyone will get there, which is, again, another reason why we don't need to be critical or judgmental of anyone, because they're all making their way back to God just as we are. As Master said, everyone is on the spiritual path. Some devotees are running ahead, some are jogging in place, and some are going backwards. He said, so we don't have to worry about that too. We also don't have to worry how advanced we are on the spiritual path. That, well, I think I'm better than that. Not helpful. Or the all too common, I wish I were as advanced as this person. Master said, Swamiji said, there are as many cars ahead of you on the road as there are behind. So none of it matters. The point is that you get to your destination. And it's the same destination for all of us. And we don't even know what it looks like. Usually, yes, you can tell that as a devotee grows, we become more and more loving, patient, courageous, thoughtful of others, and so on. There tends to be a vibration. When you're with that person, you somehow feel better, and so on. But we don't always know. I mean, there's the tradition that Karna of the Mahabharata was liberated at the end of his life because he saw Krishna's Vishvarupa and so on. And so, even though he had a lot of magnetism, he was making one big mistake the whole time. Now, I know you can argue loyalty and friendship over Dharma and so on, but that the truth was that his highest Dharma was to, well, anyway, they put it this way. I love how it's portrayed. This dilemma is resolved in that movie, Karna, with Shivaji. How Krishna says, You took society's blame, but it was actually my fault. And it's a beautiful thing. Why is it God's fault? Because God just thought it would be fun for us to have all this Maya. And God created this Maya. And there's a story, it's a fun story, how God created this whole universe basically to be entertained. It's not so arbitrary, but still, essentially to have some fun. And then he thought, well, this is nice, and I have the cats and the dogs and the cows and everything, but it would be more fun if maybe I should have some people running around. So he created some people, and then, but he made them all wise because he thought that would be the most fun. And being all wise, they looked around and they said, well, this isn't God. And so they just sat down, meditated, attained samadhi, and went back into God. And so God said, well, that didn't last very long. Let me try something else. And so this time, before he put the people down in this garden paradise, he sprinkled about cell phones and VJ TV, Star TV, and pakoras and things. And suddenly the people came down, and before seeing God, they saw the pakoras, and off they went, or the idli. We got engaged in Maya. Something to distract us. Remember, Maya is, one English translation is the measurer. That which measures, which may say, well, what's so bad about that? But when you measure, one thing you do is you analyze and you separate. And Maya is that which separates us. Of course, it's an illusion. But it's not really fair. Yogananda said, I argue with God every day. You are always happy. You never had to experience suffering. Why do you try out this hobby on us? He said, it's a terrible hobby. And then he said that all these people suffering, they don't know that it's just an illusion. And he said, it's very wrong of you. And God says, well, I'm bringing them all back to me. And Master also said, he's very sorry for what he's done. He knows he has not done right by us in that way. He said, you can even pray to God, say, I didn't ask to be created. And here you've put me here, making me run around, taking a little bit of seawater, putting it in all these bottles and making me float around in all these storms and things like that. Help me out. This is one way in which we can follow Yogananda's advice, that we make God responsible for our mistakes. It's one thing to say, God, something wonderful happened that I did, and you did it through me. That's good. But Master said we should also make him responsible for our errors. And I had a hard time, reconciling that when I first did it, because I thought, when I first heard it, because I thought, well, if I make a mistake, it's my own ignorance and so on. And also, would that give me free license to make as many mistakes as I want and say, God did it? And sometimes you see people doing that. But no, it's more that we can say, as a child could say to the mother when the child gets in trouble, why didn't you help me? Why didn't you stop me? Why didn't you tell me that the pretty little flames in the kitchen were actually dangerous? Why did you let me put my hand in the fire? What's wrong with you? Take care of me. I don't know anything. I'm your responsibility. That's easy for a parent to feel towards a child. The child can have the right to say back to the parent, help me out here. So what is the use of doing that? Why would Yogananda say, make God responsible for your mistakes? He likes that. Because normally when we make mistakes, or sometimes, we can have the tendency to collapse into ourselves, to shrink down, to say, oh, I'm such a terrible person, and so on. Yogananda even asked people to do an experiment once in an audience. He said, close your eyes and think about everything you have done. We might as well do the experiment. So, if you don't mind, close your eyes. If I can see your eyes, it means they're open still. I won't do anything while your eyes are closed. It's safe. Close your eyes, thinking back on your life till now. And think of the things you have done. And then he said, if you are thinking of all the good things you have done, then that's good. And he said, if you're thinking of the bad things you have done, then don't. So you can open your eyes now. You see, it's a good rehearsal for the end of life. We need to think about the good things that we have done and not worry one whit about the bad things that we have done. Because anything bad that we've done is just a mistake. In fact, we even have to reevaluate what is good and bad. Because often the big mistakes that we have ever done, suddenly when we discover that they were mistakes, open us up, perhaps make us more humble, or perhaps make us say, Divine Mother, you need to help me because I thought I was doing pretty well in this show, and I'm not. Sometimes it's our biggest heartbreaks that put us on the spiritual path, or make us seek truth, or strengthen our devotion on the path. So in that sense, the greatest disappointments, say, are our greatest good karma, because they help us to realize what is real. I don't mean that when we become devotees, we just renounce this whole world and say it's only God and so on. Master said, you can't hope, you must win the love of man in order to win the love of God. In other words, we have to be kind to other people too. We have to express God's joy and love and compassion to everyone too. But as channels for that compassion, not personally me to you, and so on. And so as we approach the end of this year, we can think of it a little bit as a rehearsal for the end of life. There's an essay that I would encourage you to read if you haven't, that Swamiji wrote called Death, the Final Exam. And he talked about the process we should go through at the time of death in terms of letting go of attachments, of letting go of identity, of, again, forgetting any of those things that we have done that are wrong, and being grateful for the things that we have done to help others, and so on. And there was a woman at Ananda village who was dying, and she was in the hospital. And often, especially in America, death is very sort of hidden away. And also at the time that people are dying, it's not that they're alone, but it's not, they don't always die in the home. They die in the hospital, one person is with them, and so on. She said, this woman Paula, why don't you all share my death with me? We've all had our life together, let's have my death together too. So I say this because it meant everybody was around her watching her go through this process. And one of the things she did was that she, I'll tell another story too, but one thing she did was that she thought of all of the people whom she had wronged in her life, or who there was still unresolved hurt with. And so she phoned them, and she wrote to them, and she tried to make peace with each one, trying to finish off that karma, and so on, and with some success. She was saying in an earlier time, though, this was kind of funny, before she passed away, she had been sick off and on, and she said at one point she was in her bedroom, and she felt herself leaving her body and expanding into this joy, and she felt so thrilled to be able to be in this infinite sphere. But then she realized she was dying, and she said, oh, but there was that beautiful dress I was going to buy, and then she was back in the body again. You see, that's so often what brings us back. And it's okay. Maya is like that. This beautiful story I love, if we ever get too hard on ourselves for getting caught up in Maya, is of Vishnu and Narada taking a walk and in the desert. And Narada, of course, being with Vishnu, is quite happy. And he's feeling this expanded joy. And he feels so free because he sees that though it appears that it's Narada and Vishnu, that we are all one, his bottles had been broken and his ocean seawater was free to swim in the ocean. And he was kind of thinking, gosh, it's so obvious though. And so he said, Vishnu, I wonder if you could tell me, there's one thing I don't understand. Why do people get distracted by Maya? It's so obviously an illusion. It's so transparent. Why struggle in any of this way? And so Vishnu said, oh, well, you know, I can answer that, but first could you get me a glass of water? Get me some water. I'm a little thirsty. And so it looks like there's, you know, some smoke coming from there. Maybe there's a little village or something. Could you go and get me some water from there? So Narada said, sure, Lord. And so he went over to this village and he knocked on the door of this first place that he came to. And the door was opened by this beautiful woman. And as soon as he saw her, he immediately fell in love with her. She was so beautiful and so pure. And her father said, you know, well, you seem to be a wise and, you know, saintly person. And so he said, I'm very happy to give my daughter to you in marriage. And so being married then, they thought, well, how do we get upon this business? So they had a little hut next to the father's hut, and they began working this farm nearby, and I mean working on the father's farm. But then Narada realized he could start a business of, I think it was chappals he was making or something like that, because they didn't have good chappals in the village. So he started making chappals. They had their first child, and it was a boy, and he was growing and started helping Appa with the chappal business. And then he had a second younger boy, and then their third child came, and it was a little girl. You know, she was just born, and then a flood came. Then a cloudburst happened over the village. Suddenly, all the village was awash in this rain. And so Narada grabbed his wife, grabbed his little boy and little boys, and had the little toddler child balanced on his head. No, that's not right. The mother was carrying the little baby. And so they were all trying to make their way through. As the water rose, it actually became, the whole place started turning into like a river. It was such a dangerous flood because of the slope. And so all of his chappals were washed away, all the farm was ruined, and they were trying to get to higher ground, climbing up this incline, when suddenly the wife slipped and the baby fell out of her arms, and then it was washed away. And the mother was so upset, she tried to grab the baby, but she too fell and was washed away. And Narada saw this and was completely devastated, and then I didn't know what to do. At that moment, the little boy, the one boy, slipped out of his hand. And so in an effort to grab him, he let go of the other one by mistake. And so suddenly he was gone. And Narada, too beyond with grief, you can only imagine, let himself just be washed away by these waters. And he saw this swirling mud. It was the last sight he had was all this swirling muddy water and so on. And then he looked again and he saw, well, it really wasn't muddy water at all. It was hot actually. And then he sort of looked up a little bit, and it wasn't even water at all, it was sand. And he was lying down in the sand of this desert, and he heard a voice calling to him, Narada. Narada? In fact, do I know that voice? Is that my wife? Whose voice is that? And he turned and he looked, and there was Vishnu standing over him. And he said, Narada, what have you done? I asked you to get some water. You've been gone 10 minutes and you're sleeping in the sand? And so we see that even Narada, free as he was, got caught up in that mud just like that. And so that's why we never have to feel badly about it. We can just say, okay, God, that was a good one. Ooh, really good. Yeah, you got me there. Now get me out. And so, again, the reason why we have to overcome the ego, practically speaking, is that the ego, as much as we are getting rid of past karma, the ego is making new karma, and so on. We get on the spiritual path and say, ha, now I am on the straight way home. But then we have to watch out for all the troubles that can happen on the spiritual path. One of the easiest ones is spiritual pride. which especially comes in the beginning. Well, I meditate, or my way is superior to that way, and all these things that the devotee falls prey to. There's this joke in Christianity that there was a junior devil and a senior devil that were working on trying to get a particular man to come to their side and keep away from God and so on. And this man that they were working on with, offering him all different temptations and so on, he finally got involved with religion. And the junior devil said, oh, now we've lost him. And the senior devil said, oh, now we got him. And all kinds of things. You see, it's really about the purity of our hearts and the purity of our intention. And that's the thought I would leave you with that we read in the affirmation. We should not judge others or ourselves by our actions, by the past, but by our intention. And we should define ourselves in terms of, I am someone trying to do good. I don't care if I've messed up 1,000 times. I don't care if I've succeeded 1,000 times. I want to be free and open our hearts to say, Divine Mother, fill me and free me.